absolutely delighted to have Shree Viswanathan here with us today. He is the founder of SVN Capital. After growing up in Chennai, then called Madras, in South India, he came to the US to pursue graduate studies in 1989. After graduating from the University of Chicago with an MBA, he spent time in the corporate finance world as an investment banker with Alex Brown, a member of the mergers and acquisitions team at Thomas Weisel Partners, and as a corporate development executive at Union Bank of California. From 2005 to 2018, he honed his craft as portfolio manager and analyst at Discovery Financial Partners, Advisory Research, and Keeley Asset Management in Chicago, Illinois. He founded SVN Capital in 2018, where he manages a concentrated global equity portfolio in both a private partnership and separately managed accounts. Thank you for joining us today, Shree.
Absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here. So thanks for your time today.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. And excellent. So let's get started with the presentation.
Absolutely. Let me see if I can share the presentation here. Can you see this?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, fantastic. Well, Itai, thanks again for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to present. Looking at the past lineup of Hall of Fame investors, Monish Pabrai, Howard Marks, Wally Weitz, the newest board member of Berkshire, and many others, I'm not sure how I fit in here. To be presenting on this platform, it's truly an honor. So thank you again. Since most of the students in your club and many of the listeners may not know or may not have heard about me or SVN Capital, I thought if you give me a few minutes, I'll walk you through a quick presentation, just 4 slides, and tell you a little bit about who I am and who SVN Capital is. That's a hello from my compliance team. This is a little bit about me, as you very graciously introduced. I spent time as a banker and over the last few years as an investor. But I'm originally from India. I came as a graduate student pursuing master's in accounting. I then worked for an insurance company in Des Moines, Iowa, before going back to B school. How exciting, right? Background is in accounting, worked for an insurance company, lived in Iowa. I know, it's very exciting, but please curb your enthusiasm for a few more minutes. I've spent more than 22 years in the capital markets, some as an M&A banker, some as a corporate development executive, many over the last few years as an investor. But back in 2010, I knew I wanted to run my own fund. That's when I was working for Advisory Research, a storied Chicago-based investment firm that was then acquired by Piper Jaffray, an investment bank. But I waited for another 8+ years before I launched SVN Capital. Along the way, I picked up a few lessons, a couple of important ones. Number one, I realized that investing is an individual sport. And number two, the need for alignment of interest. Hopefully, in this presentation and in the Q&A section, we'll cover both of them. So first, the why. Why SVN Capital? I knew I wanted to run this investment fund. Investing is my passion. That's what I trained for all my life. But why SVN Capital? That too in the middle of a sea of similar such funds. Essentially, I started piecing together what I call as my personal monopoly. The first piece was investments. That's what I wanted to offer. But then I started asking more questions as to how to get an answer for that primary question. And I realized that ego is the source of most problems in life. Ego is most certainly the source of problems in the investment world. It makes you overconfident, or in other situations, it makes you think you know something when you really don't. So I wanted to address this monster. Well, I relied on and still rely on spirituality to help reduce the impact of ego. Specifically, I follow a method that's not quite meditation, but something beyond. It's a method that eliminates, or at least helps me work on eliminating the subject-object relationship, which I believe is the source of ego. And it's called self-realization. I can explain the details of this later if you're interested. So heavy reliance on spirituality. The benefit and an outcome of this exercise is that it encourages me to be patient. You know, as the great John Wooden, former UCLA basketball coach, said, good things take time, as they should. We shouldn't expect good things to happen overnight. Actually, getting something too easily or too soon can cheapen the outcome. So patient and long-term are part of who I am. So that's the second piece of this puzzle. And then finally, associated with that is how I stumbled on to Sam Harris, a philosopher who also writes and talks about mindfulness. He wrote a very beautiful phrase. He said, the quality of your mind determines the quality of your life. Happiness and suffering are mental events. I just modified it a little bit and said, quality of mind determines the quality of life, as well as quality of investments. So the answer to this question, why SVN Capital, is I wanted to offer a fund that I would be interested in investing if I were doing something else. So investment is what I offer. Spirituality is what drives me, and taking a patient and long-term approach. Quality, taking that approach, quality business is what I'm interested in. So the next question is how? How do I do this? How do I go about putting a portfolio together? Essentially, that is what my investment criteria is. I'm trying to get an affirmative answer for the following 4 questions, and in that same sequence, same order. Do I understand the business? The proverbial circle of competence question. Is it a business? Is it a high quality business with sustainable competitive advantage? The reversion to mean is the one constant in the business world. But there are certain businesses that either avoid it or defer it for far into the future. That's what I'm interested in. And so that's the quality of the business part. And then is it run by honest, competent management team with skin in the game? Now I want to have good stewards of capital running our businesses. Finally, is it available at a reasonable valuation? And the final piece is what do I offer? So what I offer is a long-only equity portfolio that's highly concentrated. It's global in its approach with a very equitable fee structure. I don't use any I don't use any outside leverage. I don't hedge. I don't even hedge my FX exposures. It's highly concentrated, 10 to 15 names, and global. Currently, it's United States and Western Europe mostly. Always looking for other opportunities, but I overlay a few other constraints to funnel down the opportunity into a very manageable list. So that's what I wanted to sort of introduce you and your club members to, as far as who I am and who SVN Capital is. With that, we can go back to our originally scheduled Q&A.
Yeah, that sounds terrific. Thank you so much. So our first question, and it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. Our first question is, do you identify more with, let's say, a more modern Buffett moat type of investing, or a more, let's say, Benjamin Graham or early Buffett days net type of investing, or deep value?
Yeah, investing is an individual sport, as I mentioned. I've gone through that evolution. For many of us, because valuation is an exercise in in unraveling the quantitative aspect, it's easy to focus on valuation first, and thereby leading to deep value and Ben Graham type of investment opportunities. But what you realize over time is that's a good starting point, but that's also a highly competitive space. Young talent like you and many others, as well as many seasoned veterans, approach investing from that angle. Valuation is the primary driver as the first and foremost driver, and then they get onto the various different pieces. I've gone through that evolution. I'm not sure, I don't think I deserve to be in the same sentence as Warren Buffett or Ben Graham. I would just say my evolution has taken me to a point where I now start asking first if it's a quality business, and then is it run by good management team. Finally, I ask if it's reasonable valuation. So it's a little bit of a reordering of the same set of questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And maybe speak a little bit more about your process for initially sourcing ideas, and how large of a role do screens play in that process, and screeners, whether it's, let's say, more quantitative screeners or whether it's keyword screeners.
Right. So it's a combination of many things. Again, in that evolution as an investor, it used to be primarily screens. I still run a number of screens. In fact, I just created one today. I run 23, 24 screens. It's an integral part of unraveling ideas, but that cannot be the only source. Again, because a lot of people are able to screen for ideas, just like me, and highly competitive. So it's a combination of quantitative and qualitative analysis. I have a wide network of friends that I talk to, management teams that I meet with, talk to, and read a lot from other managers. So idea sourcing is a mix of both qualitative and quantitative features. Neither one dominates the portfolio at any one point. Yeah, sometimes it may appear that one dominates the other. It's just an accident. It's not by design.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And can you speak a little bit more about how you initially became interested in business and in investing?
Yes. I distinctly remember the time when I became interested in this craft. As I mentioned, I was working as an accountant at an insurance company in Des Moines, Iowa, Principal Financial Group. I was part of their international group. Principal, you may or may not know this, but they are one of the largest 401k providers in the country. And at that time, this was in the 90s, at that time they were planning and working on exporting that strategy, that product to many other countries. So I was part of that group. I was an accountant, a controller, always on the road, setting up offices in Asia, South America. But I distinctly remember this point when Buffett announced the second tranche of Geico acquisition. So my office was right next to the investment team's office, and a couple of the investment analysts became very excited about that transaction. They ended up talking a lot about it. I didn't know, even though it was Des Moines, which was just a couple of hour drive from Omaha, I didn't know much about Berkshire. I didn't know anything about Buffett or Geico at that point, but that instigated something in me, and started digging, and that's what actually led me to the business school, to the University of Chicago. However, I got onto a different path at that point. I wanted to be an investment banker, then realized that that's not what I really wanted to do. So reverted back to investing a few years after.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that you don't hedge foreign currency. Has that caused issues for you in the past? Let's say if you've invested in a country where the currency looks fairly stable, and then some sort of macro event happens and they go into hyperinflation essentially.
I'm not sure about the last part, the hyperinflation part. I'm very mindful of the type of countries I want to be invested in to begin with. I gave you a little bit of a teaser on the type of the portfolio that I currently have. So outside the US, I'm looking for, first and foremost, companies and countries that follow IFRS. Now, I have a CPA, did the equivalent of CPA back in India. So I understand a little bit about accounting. And I wanted to make sure that the accounting, which is the business, which is the language of business, something that I can understand. And so outside of US GAAP, I want to have IFRS. Of course, 110 countries around the world follow IFRS. That's still a large base. So on top of it, I overlay a constraint, which is essentially governance and IP laws that are more comparable to the West. I want to be confident that somebody like Cuba or many other countries may, including Russia today, they're all talking about and have done, have expropriated assets in the past. So I certainly don't want to be associated with those types of countries and businesses. So IP laws and governance that's more comparable to the West. And then finally, I want the financials to be in English. You're talking to the investment committee of SVN Capital. And so I want to make sure that my time and resources are spent right. I don't want to be spending too much time translating stuff. So I overlay those things, and that leads me to fairly stable Canada, Western Europe, and a few countries outside of that. However, you hit on a very important point. I do, and so I don't necessarily hedge the FX risk. I allow natural hedge to play out, given my interest in taking a patient long-term approach. I believe natural hedge will work out. However, I am invested in Poland today, and as you know, right at its border is this big war between Russia and Ukraine. Lots of immigrants, refugees into Poland. The Polish currency zloty has depreciated almost 15%. It's actually improved a little bit over the last week. But absolutely nothing, based on what I know, I don't expect any hyperinflation situation at this point. I wouldn't want to be associated with a hyperinflation situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you've mentioned that Western Europe is, one of the targets that you look for in investing. Are there any companies historically, let's say over the last few years, are there any countries that have particularly stood out to you where you find, let's say, more investments in them than other countries in that area?
It's another interesting question. I think that opportunity set also moves around. I have, the financial press in the US typically paints Europe, the larger continent of Europe, as relatively slow growing, and the opportunity set remaining somewhat less robust. I don't think that is an appropriate way to define and describe Europe. Yes, there are certain countries, certain sectors that are relatively slow growing, and the opportunity set is limited. But you have certain pockets. For example, I'm invested in Sweden, in one of the largest online gaming providers. They don't necessarily provide directly to the consumer, but it's more a business to business provider. Fascinating business that was founded only in 2006. I'm invested in Poland, as I mentioned. Poland is the larger Eastern Europe, has terrific tech talent. Poland in particular has specialized in gaming talent. Lots of US and other Western gaming companies have set up their base in Poland. So there are lots of different opportunities like that, moves around. Brexit, for example, put a damper on opportunities in UK. And it's actually becoming a lot more attractive today, given everything that has happened post-Brexit. I'm not invested there, but opportunity set will move around just because of other macro factors and variables.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe talk a little bit about investing in India. What are your thoughts on investing in India? Do you have exposure there now? Those types of things.
Yeah, so I'm originally from India. In fact, when you look back, when you rewind the clock all the way to the 70s, as an index, India has a couple of different big indices. As an index, it's one of the few that actually grew 100x over a span of just about 30 years, a little less. Fascinating opportunity set. I'm currently not invested in India for a couple of reasons. Technical reason is the more important one, which is I'm an American citizen. As a US citizen, as any non-Indian for that matter, you have to go through some additional hoops to get qualified to become eligible to trade. I can set it up. It's a little bit of a time-consuming process. In the meantime, the opportunity set continues to evolve. It's actually had a great run more recently. I'm constantly, monitoring the situation, and hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, I will have at least one investment there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that makes sense. And so we've just spoken a good amount about countries that you invest in. Let's transition now a little bit to industries. Are there industries that you avoid and have historically avoided because you feel like they're outside of their circle of competence? And on the other hand, are there industries where you've tended to have found a lot of your opportunities in?
Yeah, absolutely. So that is important, right? Knowing the edge of your circle of competence is fairly important. I told you that I was an M&A banker. That was primarily in the financial institutions group. I was a corporate development executive. I was doing M&A for a bank, Union Bank of California, by acquiring other banks, insurance agencies, trust businesses, again, financial services. And as an investor, I've spent a little bit more time focused on financials and many other areas. But that also answers part of the question. I did not spend any time in pure oil and gas, exploration, production type of businesses. Similarly, mining. More recently, Bitcoin has become a big area of focus for many. That's something that I don't even spend a second of my time on. Biotech, similarly, is something out of my circle of competence. So I avoid all those things. And fortunately, there are other areas: consumer staples, discretionary, industrials, financials, technology. So there are many other areas that I do spend time on, and that's where I like to keep the portfolio focused.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense. And maybe speak a little bit about how important you think either a MBA or a CFA is within the investment management industry, particularly in regards to value investing.
Yeah, I think the best investment you can make ever in your life is in yourself. That's the highest return on investment that you can ever find. Of course, these days, MBA from a Brown, or I don't think Brown offers MBA, but any of the Ivy Leagues or Chicago or Northwestern, it definitely puts a hole in your pocket. I know I've been through it. I know the feeling. So it's a very relevant question at this point. Let me address MBA first, and then I'll come to CFA. I think you can make your MBA work for you in any which way you want. If you do get an opportunity to go to a great institution, any of the top 10 or any of the great institutions, I would still highly encourage people to go do it. Not necessarily from an investment standpoint. You can learn many of the things that you would eventually end up doing outside of school. But what that platform gives you is the ability, is the chance to interact with other brilliant minds, both your own classmates as well as your professors. And it exposes you to areas that you will probably never be exposed to. But you can still be a very successful investor, but the opportunity set, the type of doors that you may get a chance to knock on is something that many of these platforms offer, many of these great business schools offer. Should it cost this much? That's a different question altogether. CFA, on the other hand, I would, again, for the investment world, I would highly encourage people to take that opportunity. As you probably know, there are 3 levels. There is a good bit of accounting, which you will end up using all through your investing life. A good bit of finance, which obviously you will be using. Lots of other stuff like derivatives and many other areas that you may or may not end up using in your investing career. But overall, I would highly encourage students to think about making that high ROI investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's maybe transition to discussing 2 case studies of past investments you've made. One where it was an investment where your thesis played out and the investment did well, and another one where the thesis did not play out and the investment did not end up doing well, and what the lessons that you learned from that were.
Great question. So, that's actually a nice order, one that worked well. So this is actually a small insurance company that they offered primarily health, medical type of insurance company, with a few different subsidiaries. This is going all the way back to 2008-9 timeframe. The company name was Independence Holding. The patriarch, the founder, had passed away. The wife essentially controlled close to 70% of the company. Brought in this gentleman who essentially acted as the CEO right till the end. Phenomenal opportunity in terms of how they thought about the medical and health insurance, and how they diversified the various different subsidiaries into opportunistic situations. Back in 2003, 2003, the company had stumbled onto a subsidiary with a massive net operating loss. I don't want to bore you with some of the details, but the company wanted to get hold of this net operating loss, which is essentially an opportunity to offset against income to reduce taxes. But there are tax rules in place that prevents one from taking control of such NOL and offsetting your income. So the company put in place a slow and steady acquisition of shares in that company. It took them almost 10 years to complete that process. And around 2013 and 14, they had completed this acquisition, by which time they had also developed a unique line of insurance business, which was catastrophe health. That became very attractive for Swiss Re, which is a big insurance company from Europe that came and acquired the subsidiary. Almost the entire purchase price of $500 million was gained for them, which they were able to offset against this NOL. Great use of capital. But prior to this happening, in 2011, the board had given a very interesting contract to the CEO. The contract said, if you, the CEO, you end up selling any of the subsidiaries, the difference, the price what you get relative to the book value of that subsidiary, the difference, 3% of that is what you will get as compensation. Now, this was not publicized very extensively, but it was put in the proxy. I monitored this right around when it was published, and the company kept really a low profile on this. But fast forward to 2021, eventually the company pieced out the various different subsidiaries, sold them out. The CEO walked away with that 3% difference. Average cost of about $13 per share for me ended up being a final price of about $56 a share. And that was a great outcome. I think it was a small insurance company with 60-70% controlled by them, and so it was illiquid as well. On the other hand, what did not work out? Well, this was a UK-based bank, founded by an American who had been very successful when he founded and ran a US company that he eventually sold. And the opportunity set in UK looked very interesting. All the behemoth legacy banks were being disrupted by these newer institutions. Metro Bank is the name of the company in UK. I've done a lot of work. I visited them a few times, met with the chairman here, went to the head office to meet with the CEO, CFO. The local management team stumbled on a few very critical areas in terms of managing capital, in terms of managing the actual operating entities. One thing led to another. The operation was, they're still around, they're still publicly traded. The investment went south very quickly after the CEO stumbled on those very important areas. He was finally let go, even though I had exited the name by that time, because I still have a lot of respect for the chairman. I helped him find the next CEO for the bank. I'm still in touch with all of them. I'm not invested in that company at this point. Many lessons learned, but that's part of investing. You make mistakes and you learn a lot, and hopefully don't repeat them again.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing those case studies. It's very valuable to learn from them. Maybe speak a little bit more about how you analyze management.
It's another art. It is absolutely, at least from my standpoint, it is absolutely important that you get to know the management team. After all, I can spend 3,000 hours on a company and still not know exactly how things are done inside, because I'm always on the outside. So to have that good steward of capital, you want to be able to understand and appreciate how they think about capital, how they think about culture. And so there are a few different ways of doing it. I can still go wrong, but hopefully there are certain footprints that I can follow that tell me that I'm in the right direction. So first and foremost is owner-operated businesses in the West, US, Western Europe particularly. It's slightly different in Asia, particularly China and India and a few other countries. But let me stick to US and other Western European countries. Owner-operated entities have a very different flavor compared to an agent-run business. It's obviously their own child, and so they want to manage this appropriately. And so as a part of that, they bring in a culture that is very unique, that is different from many other competitors or peers. For example, I'm invested in a company called Copart. It's the largest salvage yard company in the US. It's essentially a duopoly. And these guys essentially, Copart has approximately 50+% of the market. And a distant second is a company called IAA, which is based here in the suburbs of Chicago. Spun out of another bigger company just a couple of years ago. But Copart is, the chairman founded it. He's now in his late 70s. His son-in-law is the CEO. Between the two of them, they own about close to 11% of the company. Good skin in the game. They've been doing this from day one. And the culture is very evident. The business model is very different. They think about reinvesting in the business by acquiring land. And back in the days when, online and internet was just beginning to grow, they decided to move the entire business online, entire business of auctioning the vehicles online. All that is paying off tremendously today. Switch over to IAA. As we speak today, this company came public just a couple of years ago. And today, this morning, an activist investor filed a letter agitating for the CEO to be removed or the company to be sold. And so it's a distinction between, owner operated versus agent operated. Owner operated has that, first step of that footprint. Secondly, the culture part becomes evident in how they set up the employee base. They give, sometimes they give equity participation for the employees, at least the US companies do. And that brings in a level of ownership. And, that allows for the flywheel to start working in the shareholders' favor, which is me, the investor, the management team, and the employees. And that culture is something that is very different in agent-run businesses, many agent-run businesses. I'm obviously painting it with a very broad brush, but those are areas that give me some comfort. And then, of course, meeting with them, reading about them, talking to other managers, talking to other competitors, all that will sort of add to, embellishing the picture a little bit more. So that's how I've been getting comfort.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great framework. And what are some of the long-term economic impacts that you see as a result of COVID?
I would, from my portfolio standpoint, I see this more as a positive. For example, one of the companies I'm invested in is Intuit, the big tax and accounting software company that has sort of evolved into many other things. They now own Mint, Credit Karma, personal finance, and then more recently MailChimp, which is for communication purposes and stuff like that. So, they have they made a very interesting observation recently. Prior to COVID, on an average, an individual, an entrepreneur, or just an individual working for somebody accessed approximately 2.2 apps, on any one day. How did they arrive at this? There was some other source that they used. I don't know what the source is, but I'm just repeating what they had observed. It's an interesting observation. Prior to COVID, there was about 2. Post-COVID today, the way they have evaluated it, it's close to 4.6 apps per day. And so clearly working from home requires people to be able to access many other things. It has absolutely impacted many brick and mortar based businesses. And we're still seeing the impact of that evolve over time. But from my portfolio standpoint, the businesses that I'm interested in, which are not in the portfolio, from that standpoint, I view this as a positive. It has essentially brought forward many of the developments that might have happened, brought forward by somewhere between 3 to 5 years. So, another example that I would give here is Evolution. Evolution AB is a Swedish company that I own. They provide these online live casino games to, operators around the world. People working from home, accessing various different entertainment avenues has allowed Evolution to, expand its base very aggressively. The United States is a sort of a late entrant to this live casino part of it. Europe is a dominant geography in this regard. So Evolution is actually growing here as we speak from a very small base. And that's all happening because, partly because COVID forced people from going to the live casinos, even though things have opened up. Online access is much easier, and it allows particularly younger gamers to play evolution type of games, working from sitting in their home or accessing it from other places.
Yeah, absolutely. And just transitioning on to another topic, any advice for students who, let's say, aspire to start a fund one day on how does one know when it's the right time to start your own fund and to stop sort of working for someone else? And how do you raise that initial capital? And how do you figure out some of the initial sort of lockup period terms and those types of things? And just any advice in that regard?
Sure. Yeah, that's an important question for people who eventually want to arrive at this end game of managing money on on their own. I think it's a very personal thing. I know friends of mine with whom I've worked. They've never really wanted to set up something on their own, but I knew fairly early on that this is how I wanted to spend the rest of my life. So it's a question of what resonates with you internally. You constantly want to listen to that inner voice. It's a difficult exercise, I understand, but essentially that's what it is. You want to listen to that inner voice and follow that path. So once you sort of decide to have your own firm at some point, the better path to undertake, unlike what I did, is figure out 3, 4, 5 different firms that sort of fit your mold, fit your investing style, and start learning the craft. There are certain basics that you really want to have. And this is a business where you're sitting in front of a computer or sitting in front of your financials for the most of the day. You want to know, you're either reading about the company or you're reading about something else. You want to listen to that inner voice. You want to know if you really like to spend time reading, books, financials, whatever that may be. That's the primary focus of your time on a daily basis. Is that something that you like? If you really like to meet people and be on the road, this is probably not that type of business. So listening to that inner voice will lead you down that path. And then these 3 or 4 different, 5 different firms, if you join them, you can hone your skill set a lot more. That may or may not necessarily be the right style for you, the individual. And then again, you want to listen to your inner voice and see, what you want your eventual independent style to be. In my case, I learned a lot from the founder of Advisory Research, late Mr. David Heller, and then the chairman, Mr. Brian O'Brien. I've learned a lot from both of them. I've had to unlearn a few things to relearn something for how I wanted to do it. And so you constantly want to listen to that inner voice. And raising assets, that's by far the most difficult exercise. I'm still going through it. There are various different ways of addressing that problem. If I were to redo this, maybe that's one way of answering this question. If I were to redo this, what I would recommend to a younger me is work for one of those firms that fit my initial need for a few years, and then take a little bit of time off to write a book, to write your thoughts down. It may not be a book, it may be a sequence of various different articles that you publish, and it can help you, it can help you come up with your own investing style for the future. That's what I would have done if that's what I would recommend to a younger me. But yeah, that path would also help you raise assets. Hopefully, you put up some good numbers, and that kind of a profile will put you in front of a few people, a few institutions, and that could help you raise assets. But that's by far the most difficult aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's really interesting. And I guess just speaking about your personal experience more in that regard, I mean, was there anything specific that, when it got to be 2018 made you really say, now is the time, now is when I'm going to start SVN Capital, rather than 2017 or 2019? Was there anything that just sort of, pushed you to do it?
Yes, a few points. So at that time, I was working for Keeley Asset Management here in Chicago. But if I actually rewind the clock a little bit, as I mentioned, advisory research was acquired by Piper Jaffray in 2010. And I knew I wanted to do this, but I sort of spent my time at advisory before joining Keeley. John Keeley, the founder, had passed away, and so I knew there was going to be some sort of a change. Keeley was eventually acquired by Mario Gabelli, and one after the other, as I saw some of the firms that I worked for get acquired, I knew that I wanted to pull the trigger, or pulling the trigger point was getting nearer and nearer. So I have two young sons. My younger son was getting ready to go to college at that point. And with the acquisition of Keeley by Mario Gabelli, and with my own personal situation opening up with my son getting ready to go to college, I decided this was the time, if there was one. There is no real, real appropriate time to do something like this. Waiting for the exact right time is more like waiting on the shores for the waves to recede. It many times doesn't happen that way. So you just have to take the plunge. And there were these, trigger points that sort of helped me move along the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great sort of background and very interesting. And for a concluding question, what were the most influential events of your investing career?
Quite a few, but the one important event I would cite here is getting to work for Mr. David Heller, late Mr. David Heller, and Brian O'Brien at Advisory Research. Prior to that, I was running a small hedge fund focused on financial services. That's the Discovery Group, which was also seeded by Piper Jaffray at that point. And it was a very different style of investing. It resonated more with my investment banking days. I wanted to, as Sam Harris said, the quality of life, the quality of thinking leading to quality of life. That's what I was hoping for, without necessarily knowing that's what Sam Harris had taught. But getting an opportunity to work for Advisory Research at that point set me on this very important path. It was value-oriented investment style. It was mostly US-centric at that point, various different types of products that we offered, small cap, micro cap, and all that. But I kind of roamed all over the place. Focusing on quality of business, focusing on the quality of management team, trying to understand what the meaning of valuation is, and bringing the various different pieces of the mosaic together to make a decision. I think that was by far the most instrumental event in my investing career.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This is a really, really tremendous session, and really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to speak with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me, and had a great time speaking with you, Itai. Good luck.
Excellent. Thank you. Good luck to you as well. Have a great day.